Hello everyone, today we are going to be talking about the unit circle. Before we get into the unit circle though, we are going to do a quick little warm up here that's going to set us up for some of the things that we need. But before we even do that, I do want to just quickly show you here, this is the unit circle. Okay, there's a lot of different things that go into this. We're going to end up talking about everything that's on here in little bits and pieces, but I want you to see what an entire unit circle looks like before we start to get into everything. So we're just going to be talking about some of this stuff today. But I want to make sure you know that we're getting all of this information eventually. We're just going to tackle it piece by piece. So let's get to these triangles. So on your screen here, you have two triangles. They are your special right triangles, your isosceles right triangle with the two 45-degree angles, and your 30, 60, 90 triangle. Now in these triangles, what I've done is I said that the hypotenuse is 1. What I want you to do is I want you to find your other sides. So in my isosceles right triangle, we know that our two sides are equal and they're x. My hypotenuse should be an x square root of 2. So if I want to find my x, I simply need to divide by the square root of 2 on both sides. And when I do that, I know that x is equal to 1 over the square root of 2. But we also know we cannot leave that square root in the bottom, so we're going to rationalize and multiply by the square root of 2 on top and bottom, which gives us the square root of 2 over the square root of 2 squared, which is the same thing as the square root of 2 over 2. Okay, so this side down here on the bottom is the square root of 2 over 2, and my vertical side here is also the square root of 2 over 2. Okay, for our 30, 60, 90, it's going to be a little bit easier to get through. Move this up so you can see it a little bit. Because my 1 here is actually in the place of the 2x, my across from my 30 is my x, and across from my 60 is x squared root of 3. Well, if this is 2x, then I could divide by 2, and x is going to simply be 1/2. So my x down here on the bottom is a 1/2. Sorry, that's a 1 over 2. Okay, and then my other side here, I would take the x, which is 1/2, and I'm going to multiply it by the square root of 3. Now, square root of 3 is really square root of 3 over 1, so when I multiply that, that is the square root of 3 over 2. So this side here is simply the square root of 3 over 2. Okay, now what I have here is I have a side that's 1/2 across from my 30, across from 60 is the square root of 3 over 2, and across from my 45s are square roots of 2 over 2. The reason we needed to do these is we are going to create triangles with them. So I have some small yellow triangles here that essentially match exactly what we have, and I've already labeled them. Okay, I have one here, and I've labeled the back side of it as well, so it also works. I have another one that's a 30, 60, 90, just in a slightly different way. Same thing, I've labeled all the sides there. And then I also have my 45-degree triangles. This one's a little bit backwards, but it looks like this. And I have square root of 2 over 2 and square root of 2 over 2. Same thing on the back of this one as well. Okay, we're going to be using these triangles as we start to set up our unit circle, but I wanted you to know how I got the sides that are on those yellow triangles as well. So let me get rid of my whiteboard here and get a blank unit circle. Okay, this blank unit circle is one that you can find on Google Classroom. There's a couple different versions of it. I'm using the full page one here. You could very easily do it on a half page one, but we're going to put a lot on here, so I want to make sure we have room. Okay, before we get going too far, let's talk about what the unit circle is. Because that's going to actually help us with some of the things that we need to fill in. So, first of all, it is a circle. Obviously, you can see that. But it is a circle on a graph, okay? And it's very specifically the circle that's centered, where this center here is at the origin. So this is at 0, 0. Okay, and the other really important thing is we actually know our radius here. Our radius is 1. Okay, and that's why it gets the name unit circle. Whenever we have that word unit in math, we typically mean just one of whatever we're talking about. So here it's a radius of 1. Okay, and that's also why, if we just quickly go back to my triangles here, why I've made all my hypotenuse on these 1. Okay, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be matching these things up in the middle. And you can see that when I match this up in the middle, it now lands exactly on the outside of my circle. Same thing with each one of these. Okay, that's kind of the way that these are designed so that it fits directly inside my circle. Okay, and we'll be using those as we keep moving. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about really 3 points in each quadrant. So I have my first quadrant here, second, third, and fourth. Those 3 points correspond to our 3 exact angles that we can work with. So our 30, our 45, and our 60. But we also have points where just our axes cross our circle as well. So we're going to actually start with these. Okay, for each one of these points, we can talk about the angle measure that would be needed to get to these points. Now, the really important thing is, where do we start measuring these angles from? Well, we actually start over here. I'm going to label these on the inside of my circle. We start with 0 degrees right here where our x-axis meets the positive side of the circle. Okay, this is just where we always start. Okay, it's where we always start our measurements. Okay, from here we go in the positive direction, so we go up, and I measure all the way around my circle. Well, we know that a circle is 360 degrees, so this point over here could be called 0 degrees. It could also be called 360 degrees, because I could go all the way around the circle and get back to that point as well. Okay, from there I actually want to jump all the way over to the other side of the circle. Well, now I'm in a straight line as far as my angle, or I'm going halfway around the circle. Well, half of 360 is simply 180. So this point over here on the left-hand side is going to be referred to as 180 degrees. Let me go ahead and zoom in just a little bit. We don't quite need to be zoomed out quite as far right now. Make sure you can see all of it there. Okay. Then we'll go up to our top point here. Well, that's halfway between 180 and 0. Okay, which you should be thinking is 90 degrees. Okay, I can also see that that would be the 90-degree angle that's formed right here at the center as well. Okay, I do have one more main point down here on the bottom that we should talk about though, and that one's a little bit trickier. That's now going 180 degrees plus another 90, or 90 backwards from 360. You can start to work out the math there, but it's going to be 270 degrees. Okay, now the other important thing is that at each one of these degree measures, we're also going to talk about a coordinate. So I'm going to get the 4 coordinates that go with these as well. Well, that's where the points 0, 0 and my radius of 1 come in. So if I start at 0, 0 and I go to the right 1 unit, I end up at this point out here that I've called 0 degrees and 360, which means my x coordinate is going up to 1, while my y coordinate stays at 0. Okay, so this is a positive 1 here. Sorry, there's a little smudge there, it's a little confusing. So that's a positive 1. Okay, then I'm going to go up to the top. From here I'm going from 0, 0 up 1, which means my x coordinate stays the same, but my y coordinate becomes a 1. Then I'm going to move to the left in my x direction. That means my x goes to a negative 1, my y stays at 0. And then I can go down where my x is going to stay at 0, but my y is a negative 1. And so I can start to get a degree measure and a coordinate for every place where my axes meet my circle. Okay, what I'm also going to do is, we have these tick marks all the way around. I'm going to find the same information for each one of those. So I'm going to find an angle measure and a coordinate that goes with them. Okay, and this is where our triangles are going to come into play. So I'm going to start with my first triangle here. The first triangle I'm going to work with is my isosceles right triangle. So if I place that in my circle here, you can see that I'm forming my 45-degree angle from my x-axis up to this hypotenuse at the center of my circle. So what that means is, when I get to this middle tick mark here, okay, I am going to be at 45 degrees, because that's my angle measure. And then I need to figure out my coordinate. Well, the coordinate here can be found by just looking at the triangle. The way we label our coordinates are our x coordinate and our y coordinate. Our x is how far we move side to side. Well, that's my horizontal part of my triangle, which here is the square root of 2 over 2. And I can do the same thing for my vertical, which is also the square root of 2 over 2. So my coordinate at 45 degrees is the square root of 2 over 2 and the square root of 2 over 2. Okay, now that coordinate is going to show up a few more times, because what I can do is I can take this triangle and I can reflect it over my y-axis. Well, now I'm over here at this point. Okay, let's quickly talk about our angle measure here. I'm going 45 degrees backwards from 180, so I would subtract that, or I'm going additional 45 from 90. If I add those together, that ends up being 135 here. Okay, and then I need my coordinate. Well, my coordinate is still going to be based on the square root of 2 over 2 and the square root of 2 over 2. The only difference is I'm now going to the left, which is negative. So my x coordinate here needs to be a negative square root of 2 over 2, and then a positive square root of 2 over 2. Okay, next thing I can do is go ahead and flip down. When I go down, now I'm going to be still to the left, so my x is going to be negative, but now I'm going down as well, so my y is going to also be negative. Okay, so here my coordinates are going to both be negative. I'm going to start with that part, and then we'll figure out our angle here in a second. Okay, and now I need my angle again. So now I'm going 45 degrees past 180. So I would add 45 to 180, or I could go backwards from 270. Either way, we get to 225 at that point. And I can do one more with my 45 triangle here. It's going to be a little bit upside down as far as those coordinates, but you can see what I'm doing. I'm going 45 degrees down from 360, or additional 45 from 270. That ends up at 315 for my angle. My x-coordinate is going to be positive because I'm going back to the right now. But my y-coordinate is going to be a negative because I'm going down or in that negative direction. Okay, so there are 4 coordinates that we've labeled. Okay, before we keep going, let's talk about our quadrants a little bit. So in your graph, you end up with 4 quadrants. The first quadrant is this upper left-hand corner, or sorry, upper right-hand corner, which is where both our x and our y are positive. Okay, I can also follow that same pattern all the way around. When I go to quadrant 2, my y is still positive, but my x has gone negative. In my third quadrant, both coordinates are negative. And in my fourth quadrant, I have a positive x and a negative y. The reason we label those is any coordinate that ends up in these should follow that same pattern. So like in my first quadrant here, both were positive. In quadrant 2, I had a negative x and a positive y, and that's going to follow all the way through as we go through our unit circle. Okay, I'm going to change to a different color here. Hopefully this one is going to show up. You're welcome to change as well. If you want to keep using the same color, that is fine. Okay, let's go ahead and start to talk about some of our 30-degree angles here, though. Okay, so let me get my triangle here. Okay, if I get that triangle placed exactly there, you can see that that first tick mark is going to be based on 30 degrees. So I'm going to call this a 30-degree angle. And then I have to talk about my coordinates. So my coordinates are going to be x and y. Both are positive in this first quadrant. But I'm going over the square root of 3 over 2. And I'm going up and down a 1/2. So those are my new coordinates there at that first tick mark. Okay, make sure you're getting these in the right place. Okay, if I reflect that over to the other side, now I'm going 30 degrees less than 180, okay, because I'm going up here from 180, 30 degrees. That's going to give me 150 for my degree measure. But now I'm going over the square root of 3 over 2, but remember that x-coordinate is negative, so my x is going to be a negative square root of 3 over 2, and my y-coordinate is going to be the 1/2. I can now reflect down here as well. Okay, same idea, I'm adding 30 to the 180, which gives me 210. Okay, and then I'm going over the square root of 3 over 2 and down a 1/2. Okay, both are negative in this case. And finally, last quadrant, we're going to start to go a little faster here because I think you're getting the point of these. My angle measure is now 30 degrees less than 360, which is 330. 30 degrees. X-coordinate is the square root of 3 over 2. Y-coordinate is a negative 1/2. Okay, and then I have one more triangle here we need to deal with. You're probably guessing we did the 30, we did the 45. Last one we need to talk about is the 60. So if I put the 60 in here, my first angle measure at the top again is going to be 60 degrees. Let me switch to a different color. That one's hard to see. Try this one. That's a little better. We'll try this one. From there, I can go ahead and label my coordinates. And my coordinates in this case are going to be my x is a 1/2, and my y is the square root of 3 over 2. So similar to the 30 degrees, but a little switched around there. Okay, if I reflect this over, I'm going 60 degrees less than 180, or an additional 30 from the 90, which puts me at 120. Excuse me. And then my coordinate here, again, is going to be a 1/2 first. This time it's a negative, though. And then a square root of 3 over 2. Then I can reflect this down. I do that. Both of these are going to be negative. So this is a negative 1/2 and negative square root of 3 over 2. Your angle measure here is going to be 240. And then your last one over here on the other side is going to be at 300 degrees. And I have a positive x and a negative y. Okay, so let me get this to where we can see everything, and then we'll start to talk about some of the patterns that we see here. Okay, with the unit circle, okay, there are a lot of patterns that are involved. We already started to talk about one here, using the positives and negatives based on the coordinates. Okay, the other one I want to point out to you is we kind of did this as we were making this, but you can see that any coordinate that is directly above or across from another has the same coordinates. They're just different signs. Okay, and I can do the same thing with my 30s here. Went across, down, across, and back up. Okay, and then finally my 60s as well. Go across, down, across, and back up. Okay, that's really important because then what that means is really we only need to focus on this first quadrant because then I can just take everything across using my positives and negatives that we have. Okay, the other thing that we need to focus on here are these coordinates themselves and kind of the patterns that we have here. This year we're not going to focus too much on the pattern because it's hard for us to test that or assess that, but typically what we would do is we would ask you to memorize this, and that's important for you to know because next year you will need to know how to memorize this. So if you can start to do that now, that's great. I'm going to point out a couple patterns here as far as your coordinates. Biggest thing is everything is over 2. Okay, so everything all the way around the circle is over 2 except for our 4 main points. Okay, the other thing that you can look at here is these start to bring in your 1/2, your 3, your square root of 2, and your square root of 2. There's lots of 1, 2s, and 3s. In fact, if I look here, if I start at 60, I have 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3 going back up. Or you can think of it as 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1 coming back down. Okay, but that pattern exists. Okay, so you can start to look at that. There's also a very nice pattern based on degrees. Okay, the degrees start at 0 degrees, and then they follow a pattern of 30, 15, 15, and 30. What we mean by that is those are the jumps that we're making. So I make a 30-degree jump, a 15-degree jump, another 15, and then a 30. Excuse me. Sorry, that's the pattern I just wrote out there. But you can follow that pattern across, and then that pattern continues all the way around your circle. So you're always going 30, then 15, then 15, then 30, then another 30, 15, 15, 30, 30, 15, 15, 30, 30, 15, 15, 30, and you're back around to where you started. So you can use that pattern to get the rest of this as well. Okay, I'm going to stop this video here just because this is kind of the first half. And now I'm going to come back in a little bit and talk about how do we use this and how do we start to answer some of the questions that you'll be asked.